The whole air conditioning, refrigeration business, motor vehicle air conditioning has been a topic of great change. Just so you know, this session tonight is also being recorded. If you want to review it again at a later date, or you know somebody who wasn't able to attend, that's a feature that we try to offer folks on these webinars if you're not able to attend the live event. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to just introduce you to tonight's webinar team. I'm going to start with Don Du, who's our Executive Director of Special Projects. He'll be co-moderating tonight's event with Tony Mala, ASE's Vice President of Communication. My name is Dave Kappert, and I'll serve as tonight's webinar presenter. Among other things, I provide Section 609 program support here at ASE, and that includes both the print booklet and the online version. Okay, it's time to go over a little housekeeping for tonight's event. Your screen displays a viewer window for the presentation itself. The content of the presentation appears in this window. During the webinar, you will not be able to speak directly to me. Instead, you can enter any questions that you may have into the questions box in the control panel. Make sure that your speakers are turned on and set to a comfortable listening level. I know many of you have entered questions already. I can't promise you that we're going to be able to answer every question tonight during the live session, but we do have them in a log, and we'll do our best to get answers to you on them. Now a few words about mobile devices. Initially, we underestimated the number of attendees that wanted this type of functionality. While using a mobile device certainly offers convenience, it also comes with some compromises. On Apple iOS, you can communicate via chat, but you cannot respond to polling questions. On Android devices, you cannot communicate via chat, and you also cannot respond to polling questions. If you don't yet have the specific app for your device, visit the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, which is formerly Android Market, so you can install that. Now a few words about tonight's webinar. ASE offers this webinar in the context of information related to the servicing of motor vehicle air conditioning. The topics presented here continue to change rapidly, so be advised. Also, this webinar will not debate the science, the regulations, or politics related to these topics. In fact, one thing I also want to add to that as a footnote is that yes, I'm the program manager for Section 609 here at ASE, but there are a number of things I'm not. I'm not a chemist. I don't represent DuPont. Those are questions oftentimes that go back to them. I can't speak for a lot of OE designs as far as their air conditioning systems go. This topic is so wide and varied, but to the extent that I can help you and from what knowledge I have accrued, I will certainly try to do that. All right, folks, I'd like to present the first poll to your audience here tonight. Please vote if you're able. Remember, mobile devices cannot vote on polling questions. Okay, hopefully everybody can see the poll. I see I'm getting numbers coming in. We're up to about 75%. I'm not going to get to 100%, I know, because again, we've got some of the mobile device contingency out there that can't vote. Wait just a few seconds longer. All right, that's probably good enough for where we're at right now. So out of the folks that are here tonight, 65% hold some sort of EPA Section 609 credential, 35% no. Okay, in tonight's presentation, I'm going to go over Section 609 review. I mean, there's been a lot of changes in the arena of vehicle air conditioning service over the last few years, and we wouldn't be able to address all of them in tonight's session, so here's an overview again of what's covered. I know a lot of you ask questions. We'll probably defer those to the end as best we can, and then we'll see how that goes. We're going to talk about refrigerant transitions, past and present. However, we won't be discussing all the various blends that have and continue to float around out there. After that, we want to talk about a situation with Daimler that occurred last year and that had some ripple effects within the industry. And then we're going to take a look at where we're likely headed. And then we're going to finish up with a couple of other things. Not about a new refrigerant, about the current one, 134a. There's a serious contamination issue that's afloat out there. I'll offer you some resourceful places that you can go to get more information, and again, we'll get back to your questions. Okay, it's been a long time, or so it seems, but the refrigerant recovery and recycling regulations were first released by EPA way back in 1992. And of course, back then it was, the whole scope of being was revolving around R12 as an ozone-depleting refrigerant. And one thing I just want to make clear with that is even though EPA may issue regulations at a federal level, every state and even localities within states can enact regulations that are at least as stringent as what the federal government requires. Then in 1995 we added recovery only to R12. 134 was added back in 1998, again as part of Section 609. And the combination of approved equipment and technician training and certification has always been the combo that's out there. And also as an inside combo, as the tech training and certification is as much training as it is taking the quiz that's out there, no matter whose you take. The EPA is very big on informing you through the training material that comes with the various programs. There is currently no expiration on the conferred certification, but that may change. We'll just have to wait and see what happens with upcoming regs. And then, of course, as you know, there was a sales restriction on R12 because of its ozone-depleting nature. That never came to pass with R-134a. Okay, one little subtle nuance of Section 609 that I just want to touch on momentarily comes into applications. Most of us probably in the audience tonight, work on passenger cars and light-duty trucks. But because some vehicles meet a definition of being an MVAC-like appliance, they can cross over and be covered under the spirit of this law. So as you can see, some buses, as long as they don't use R22, trucks, off-road vehicles where they're cooling the passenger, not any type of cargo, can be covered as an MVAC-like appliance with a 609 qualification. And then as you can see, your non-MVAC applications are trains, aircraft, refrigerated trailers, ships, boats, things of that nature. Again, that's usually going to be a cargo type of application. And I've got another poll I want to offer you. And this one I'm very curious about. because we continue to hear from people that say they still do service some R12 vehicles. Okay, I think 78% is about as good as I'm going to get, so I'm going to close that, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share it. So 48% never service one with R12, 39% every once in a great while, and 11% sometimes, 2% numerous times per year. Interesting. Thanks for your responses on that. Okay, so let's just go through refrigerant transitions very quickly here. The R12's offensive nature towards the ozone layer laid the groundwork for its obsolescence. And of course, R-134a changeover was complete by model year 1995. It had zero ozone depletion, so that was the big reason to go to it. And while we may see with a lot of smugness today that the whole R12 to R-134a and any pending retrofitting issue is really no big deal, we have to remember that we didn't know the outcome of that at the time. For example, the need for barrier hoses never presented the problem many thought it would be. Since its implementation, R-134a has been a good performer as far as a refrigerant. There's no question about that. But the only problem is that R-134a is a greenhouse gas with a number of 1430, and as most of us know, there's a lot of focus on greenhouse gases these days, regardless of where they come from, out of a tailpipe or out of an air conditioning system. And right now, R-134a is the most abundant HFC currently detected in our atmosphere. So where are we going from here? Okay, let's talk about the introduction of 1234YF, formerly known as HFO 1234YF, and also designated as R1234YF. R1234YF represents a 99.7% lower global warming potential than 134A. But there's more than just the refrigerant itself as a GHG factor. There are indirect and direct GHG factors. And what do I mean by that? A direct greenhouse gas represents refrigerant leakage directly to the atmosphere. That's like when the refrigerant gets out and is released, okay? Indirect greenhouse gas represents the CO2 emitted from the engine when it burns fuel to power the AC system, such as the AC compressor. As best as possible, the goal is to eliminate GHG impact from refrigerant whatsoever. 1234YF is formally approved as a significant new alternatives policy refrigerant by EPA. It's on their official list, as long as it's used according to subject to use conditions, which every refrigerant is. R-134A is not actually being phased out, is being phased down. This is a little bit of a different plan than the altogether phase out of R12 when the last transition occurred. And as a result of using a more GHG compliant refrigerant, the auto manufacturers get fuel economy credits. Now I'm talking on the state side here. I'm talking within the US. I'm not talking about the way the regulations work in Europe. There is some similarities, but the directive there is a little different than in the US. (1234) and 134, the outgoing refrigerant, have very similar pressure-temperature relationships. So therefore, 1234 almost is a drop-in replacement. So it's close to a drop-in replacement. As far as IDing some of the service aspects of working with 1234, You're looking at a container that's white with a red band. It's going to be less than 30 pounds. As is with any approved refrigerant by EPA, it has to have a unique set of fittings, and those are identified in SAE J639, along with a unique label. Again, fittings and label have to always be unique to every refrigerant. I saw in the chat window before, I saw some questions about the price estimate, and this is what we've gotten here, is that right now, we had originally heard 10 times as much as 134, and I think that was conservative. But we've picked up a $65 to $135 a pound with an average R-134a price of $273 a pound. And one thing I just want to add to that as a footnote is again, the Honeywell DuPont plant in China is the only manufacturing plant that originally there were concerns about manufacturing capacity. They claim that they are getting their capacity up, and so that would maybe correlate into reduced prices. I can't speak for that, but that's the hope that seems to be floating around out there. And 1234 is not for retrofitting. It's not like when we had 134 to put in originally R12 filled systems. This is not the case with this one. Recommended oil for 1234 is a PAG oil. Reverse retrofitting, that's something we've been hearing, is that because of some of the pushback on the pricing issue, we've heard people say, well, since the pressure-temperature relationship is the same, or very similar at least, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put 134a into that system. And, you know, you can kind of see the practicality, maybe some people thinking that way, but everything we've been hearing is that the EPA is going to put a law to block that out. So I would just say get that out of your head. Don't think that way. It looks like it'd get you into trouble. So we're just going to, you know, we're certainly not advocating that anyway. Retrofitting or reverse retrofitting with 1234 is a no. Okay, now during the last refrigerant with 134, we didn't get a sales restriction on that. But with 1234, we will, because of the fact that 1234 has exhibited mild flammability characteristics. So it would therefore be governed under the Toxic Substance Control Act, Toxic Substance Control Act, which applies to flammable chemicals. So therefore, that would automatically put into place a sales restriction. And again, I mentioned the Seoul plant. DuPont, again, has had some stuff out recently that's, they state that they are increasing production, and they're overjoyed by the fact of the ability to meet demand thus far. So what does that mean to the vehicle population right now? Okay, as we understand it, these are the vehicles that have 1234 in them right now. This represents vehicles both in the US and in Europe. This is from DuPont, and this is from November of 2012. Some of you out there may have even know of other vehicles or even encountered them. I know I've talked to people on both sides of the pond, and it's amazing the amount of confusion and the dual fills that are going on there, even with manufacturers. So just offer this to you. I guess what I would say is start looking at labels underneath the hood and see what's there. Okay, now I want to talk about R744, otherwise known as CO2 or carbon dioxide. Okay, it also has a ozone depletion factor of 0, but it has a global warming potential of 1, which is actually less than R1234. So how can this be? How can it be have a lower number than 1234YF? And yet 1234YF seems to be kind of the heir apparent of refrigerants. The reason is it gets back to what I showed earlier, talked about with the direct and indirect GHG emissions. Fact is that even though 1234 has a higher GHG or global warming potential, it actually requires less power from the engine to run the compressor, so therefore it actually comes out ahead of where CO2 is. So that's the reasoning, the factoring that goes into this type of thing. Okay, 744 is non-flammable. It's got a long history of being used in commercial refrigeration. and it too, like 1234, is approved by EPA. It was approved later on than 1234 was, but it is on the list, again, according to subject to use conditions, unique fittings and labels, the same story there. Okay, one of the things that seems to be attractive from a European point of view is that this is not a chemical-based refrigerant, it's a naturally occurring gas, so that is favored in some respects. But it does require higher pressures for operation, and that gets back to what I said just a moment ago about compressor and higher pressures and more load to run that sort of thing. But clearly the CO2 perspective and philosophy was favored by a lot of the German automakers to meet the European Commission directive of having a refrigerant with a global warming potential of less than 150. So in September of 2012, Daimler, the parent company of Mercedes-Benz, issued a press release stating that an investigation during a collision with a B180 class Mercedes showed that R-134YF ignited after a refrigerant line was severed and released the refrigerant on hot exhaust components. Thus, a fire ensued. As a result of Daimler's findings, the company recalled affected vehicles and switched them back to R-134a. Daimler then stated that more testing was required for 1234, but at the present time it was not moving ahead with its implementation. So up to this point, it seemed as though things were moving along fairly smoothly with adoption of 1234. It was starting to roll out, and all of a sudden this happens. So now what has happened as an industry response to this? In December, following up on the heels of Daimler's declaration, Volkswagen announced that it was supporting Daimler and announced that CO2 is really the right refrigerant due to its inflammability, and that VW would stay with 134A for the time being. After VW's announced public support for Daimler, the Society of Automotive Engineers, that is, SAE, announced the formation of a cooperative research project. Actually, it's this is actually the fourth version of that. And the purpose of this CRP, Cooperative Research Project, was to perform an updated engineering review of 1234YF. At that time, the team included Audi, BMW, Chrysler, Fiat, Daimler, Ford, GM, Honda, Hyundai, Jaguar, Land Rover, Mazda, Peugeot, Citroën, Renault, and Toyota. Audi, Daimler, and BMW have since withdrew from the CRP. GM claims that it cannot replicate Daimler's findings and therefore reaffirmed its commitment to R-1234YF. DuPont then responded, disputing Daimler's findings on several levels and has increased public awareness about the safety of R-1234YF. While the outcome of Daimler's direction is unclear at this time, you may draw whatever conclusions you want from all of this confusion, but Daimler's final direction, and for that matter VW Audi's, is still unclear. Stay tuned. So from a service industry perspective, despite some of the current confusion related to R-1234YF, you're sure to see changes in the way you do things in the service bay. For example, there will be new content in Section 609 training and certification programs to cover various requirements. As before, the framework for these changes comes out of SAE standards, and in this case, it's SAE J2845. Your performance standards for 1234YF refrigerant recovery recycling machines can be found in SAE standard J2843, and compliant equipment should adhere to this standard. Likewise, refrigerant identifiers should comply with J2912, and new electronic refrigerant leak detectors will be required, which will be scoped under J2913. So there's no question about it. There's going to be a new combination of training certification required along with equipment in order to service 1234 systems. Again, I can't at this point speak to where the certification requirements are going. Minimally, we know that it's going to include discussion of all these standards shown on my screen right now. We know that it will at least include some discussion of 744 and CO2 because it is an approved refrigerant, regardless of whether it's in one car or no cars, but it's still on the list, so we always have to discuss those sorts of refrigerants. And then also any of the subtle nuances with using the equipment will need to be addressed. And once again, I remind you that compliance with federal, state, and local regulations for flammable refrigerants, or any refrigerant program for that matter, have to be strictly followed. And I just want to give you an example that in the state of Wisconsin, it has different requirements for technician training and certification than what's required by federal law. And one more poll. This will be the final one. How soon do you plan on purchasing equipment for R-1234YF? About 73% of the votes are in. I'm going to let it get just a little bit higher than that. Please, everybody, cast your vote if you can. Okay, I'm going to close the poll there, and I'll share it. And we had 74% with no immediate plans, 14% within a year after the regulations are formalized, and 12% as soon as. So pretty close between as soon as and within a year. Okay, as both a current event topic and a footnote to tonight's webinar, I wanted to make you aware of a growing problem of contaminated R-134a. Now, this is, of course, talking about the current refrigerant that's in place that people are seeing on a daily basis, but goes to show you that things are changing all the time. The Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration Institute just issued a white paper, and we'll list where you can get that white paper from in our resources screen that's coming here in just a minute, where there have been counterfeit cylinders with all the refrigerants you can see on the screen showing up of various mixes, blends, all kinds of rogue things that maybe an alchemist would try to put together that are causing havoc out there. And of course, with today's digital means of being able to replicate labels and so on and so forth, you're seeing them on both the cylinders and on packaging being counterfeited. So a lot of these things look legit. They look like the real deal. And since you never know what you're dealing with when you get in some of these rogue blends, I mean, they do jeopardize safety and could cause injury or even worse if the right combination, or I should say the wrong combination, were to occur. So don't underestimate what this could mean. So I guess the moral of the story is really you want to test and don't trust. Always use a refrigerant identifier to know what you're up against. However, having said that, one of the problems is that, as you can see, there's no known portable analyzer detecting R40, which is one of the biggest problems out there since prior to 2012. And R40 causes havoc with aluminum. So be aware of that. In the white paper that I cited, they give a technique, and I'm not going to get into all those details here, for how to use a portable infrared analyzer, halide torch testing, and even more complex chromatography or spectrometer types of testing for, again, determining some of these mixes of refrigerant that are out there. So the bottom line is know where your refrigerant's coming from. Know your supplier. If the price sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. You want to verify your refrigerant both in the system and in the cylinder before repair or service. And definitely want to properly label and isolate any contaminated system, prevent anything from getting worse. And with that, I'll attempt to take your questions, those that I can answer, and then again we'll offer you the resource screen here in just a little bit, which may be of help. Don or Tony, do you have any questions?
Dave, this is Tony. We've had a few questions.
Okay.
I do. Actually, the first one is, with the last thing that you said, do we have any idea how prevalent the contamination problem is? Was any comment made about that in the white paper?
There's nothing in it that cites numbers or where it comes up. I mean, a lot of times these issues will surface in localities that are closer to your ports of shipping and things like that on the coast. That's where it oftentimes will come in if it's made offshore.
Okay, and there's another question. Do you know if there's any plans to use 1234YF in off-road equipment or heavy on-road trucks?
I don't know of any plans to do that. And really the main reason that we're moving towards this refrigerant is really for fuel economy reasons when you come right down to it. The car makers, this will tie everything right into the eventual 54.5 miles a gallon they have to get. And whenever you increase fuel economy, you reduce CO2 emissions, at least out of the tailpipe. This is another way for the manufacturers to reduce CO2 emissions. But I don't know about the heavy trucks as far as what they're looking at this point.
Got it. A couple of questions on new certification. Any idea on how quickly the new 609 certification will be updated and required for this?
I don't. I mean, it's really an EPA decision on what they want to do. I don't know how stringent they're going to make it, if they're going to continue to leave it to be an open book, or if they're going to require, in all areas, a proctored type of situation. If they're going to require a recert provision that maybe after 5 years you would have to redo it. I don't know if they're going to push, for example, the R12 content out, since, again, the poll tonight indicated to the contrary that R12 is still being used out there, and certainly in some applications. But I guess the question looms as far as how applicable is that content to have in there. And I know I saw one of the questions in the chat box there is, why do we have to have, any kind of certification for R12 because of that? And unfortunately, I mean, I have actually presented that very question to EPA, and sometimes it seems like they'd like to keep that in there to kind of show the legacy of how the refrigerant management program came from ozone depletion, to all the way up to the global warming issue.
Dave, there were a number of questions regarding hybrid electric vehicle AC systems with electric drive compressors, regarding the PAG oil and also the 1234YF with those systems. Any issues evident on those?
I don't know of any issues evident with them, but other than the hybrid vehicles, some of the newer compressor designs are going to be more of that hybrid type of compressor design. We're going to start seeing more and more of them because of the efficiencies that are needed. So we're going to be seeing that switch. We're going to be seeing actually lower capacities as far as refrigerant holding on these 1234 systems going forward. I guess maybe that's some relief on the cost because it will just take less refrigerant to begin with.
Okay, Dave, we had another question on the certification line. Any idea when ASE will be incorporating the 1234 into the regular certification tests, if that's appropriate?
Oh, into like our regular heating and air conditioning?
Right.
Well, the way ASE works on its regular certification exams is we always look at what's prevalent and relevant when it comes to the content. So as that refrigerant gets out there and it's commonplace in vehicles and people are seeing it, which is going to be pretty soon. Then it's going to start appearing on our test. I don't know though off the top of my head what our revision cycle is now for the heating and air conditioning test, so I don't know when that one's up for review.
Okay.
Dave, normally the technology is available out in industry for about 3 years before it finds its way into the regular certification test.
Yeah, that's a good point, Don. Thanks for that.
Okay. And I had another question about the current certification I hold for 609, and of course obviously the vehicles are hitting the street ahead of the EPA's decisions on changing content for the certification. So the guys that hold the current certification now are still legal or legit for any new refrigerants that they see, I assume.
Well, I mean, for example, in our current content in our book right now, we discuss 1234YF as a potential alternative. We discuss R744 as a potential alternative, and the thing about it is that from a legality standpoint, I don't really know where EPA sits on that because they haven't issued any of the regs yet to be adopted. I mean, again, as I kind of showed in the presentation, most all of this stuff is all defined out through the SAE standards, which again become the framework, and that's usually, that content then becomes a framework for the outline for the content, and then you have your training and certification program. I don't know if they're going to come up with anything beyond that right now, but the J2845 document I talked about is going to be a big one, and it's also going to work in relation to some of the other J standards for the new content. But as soon as that's released by EPA, as far as what we know to do, we'll get that incorporated in our program just as quickly as we can. I mean, we're calling them all the time saying, when are the regs going to come out? It was expected they would have been out at latest by mid of 2012. Of course, then there was an election year, and that probably got pushed off for whatever reason. So maybe we'll see them here going into 2013 because we get questions on it all the time.
Okay, Dave, here's one question. I think we've already answered it. Why, given the non-flammability of CO2, why don't we just go there? But I think you had mentioned it has to do with fuel economy and efficiency.
It has to do with the higher pressures that it works at, and I'm not disputing the fact that CO2 is not a good system. I don't know. I'm not one of the research engineers that worked on that. I just know that the European people, namely the Germans, are very, very solid on that, and they believe that that's the direction that they want to go in. But as any of us can imagine, all of the car makers don't want to have multiple fills in their cars. They like to come up with one thing that's going to work as best as possible and have a universal solution.
Okay, and there were a couple of other, there's still some concerns. Can you go over the flammability issue again, just quickly where we are? I know you had mentioned there's some studies being done by SAE.
On the flammability issue with 1234YF?
Correct. I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah, I mean, right from the beginning, this was no surprise, really. Right from the beginning, 1234YF had exhibited mild flammability characteristics. I don't want to say the word concerns because then I think that amplifies what it is. And a lot of that's been tested in terms of, how flammable is it, how ignitable is it, so on and so forth. And there's been a lot of testing that's gone into that refrigerant. And I've seen some of the engineers speak on it, and they're 100% confident that the flammability they're talking about is, like trying to light, I guess, a wet rag on fire. Maybe not a good analogy, but they're pretty confident that the little bit of flammability it has, it's certainly nothing like the other flammable types of things we have on vehicles today. Gasoline, other oils, and so on and so forth.
Got it. And any tips on disposing of the contaminated refrigerant once they find it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There are commercial disposal organizations out there, and what I would suggest is that you get in contact with one of them because that's something you don't want to take the responsibility with. I believe on the EPA site we'll share some of the links and resources there. There's some of those there. Also Google search is very, very powerful. Just do that. I know I've run into a few people that are in that very business.
Okay. The rest of the questions are somewhat general that I can see. Any idea how long the phase-out's going to be? I guess it's too early to tell when 134 will no longer be used.
Yeah, that's questionable because, again, they call it the phase down right now, because what they want to do is they want to provide incentives to the automakers to say, hey, I want to step up to the plate and use 1234YF. And so what that'll do is, you know, phase down the use of 134.
Understood. And there's a couple of questions I'm seeing on a reference to the white paper. You were going to post those, I believe, at the end of the presentation, the references.
Yeah.
And there they are.
Now, I apologize for that AHRI white paper URL there. I should probably turn it off on you now and give you guys a test and have you write it back to me, the entire URL. I mean, it's crazy. I realize that. But we could also, if you are interested, we could send out an email with all of that in there, so it would take the work out of it for you guys as far as viewers tonight. We could fire you off an email with all these text strings in it.
And Dave, where would they, should they send us an email to request that, or how would that work?
Well, the other thing we can do is we can just go down all the attendees, and we have your emails, and we can send this to you if it's okay with you folks. You know, maybe some of you don't want it, I'm not sure, but I would imagine most of you do.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of the response coming in, like they'd really appreciate that being sent to them.
Yeah, we'd be happy to get that out, because when I went straight to the AHRI site, I found it kind of clunky to get to the white paper, so I put the direct link on. But I think maybe that was as much of a disservice as the other way around. I'm not sure.
Dave, here's a question you can't answer. How long do you think it'll take 1, 2, 3, 4 to become more price competitive?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, that's the grumbling you hear, and I don't want to speculate, but I think that might have been some of the pushback we saw when Daimler did their thing, because of the fact that it was a single source supply, and that, you know, that makes it a little bit tough when you're trying to fill cars up. It ties all back to production. You know, whether they're going to add another plant, and you know, that'd be a great one. You know, if we had DuPont around to be able to answer that.
Dave, here's another question. Actually, it's a good one for first responders. Given the fact that some new vehicles already are using 1234, are there is there any information out there for first responders regarding the flammability issue that you're aware of?
You know, that is a very, very good question. And U.S.-wise, I don't know, but I know that this was brought up in Germany, and they made an issue out of this on the first responder side of things.
Something we should watch with manufacturers.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
And yes, Don was right. There's everybody seems to want an email, and I think actually we've gone through most of the big questions. And one more comment. This webinar will, of course, be posted. Dave, you want to give us the information on when it'll be up?
Yes, this webinar will be posted. A link to it will appear on the ASE site. We should have that link up tomorrow, where you can go and register for the recorded version. And again, if you want to share that with your colleagues, so on and so forth, or take another look at it yourself, that's fine. We'll have that there.
Okay, and from the looks of the questions, I think we're just about through all the major points that were made, Dave.
Okay. For those of you that are not certified under a Section 609 program, I mean, ASE does have a paper-pencil version to review and quiz, as you see on the screen right now. And we also offer an online version at asecampus.com, where you can go through the training material, take the questions, and if you pass, you will be given a temporary certificate immediately, which is good for 60 days, and then after that, you'll get a permanent credential in the mail. So we try to make that as easy as we can. And you know, keep watching your email inboxes and ASE's website and any other point of contact you have with us, because when we hear more from EPA and you know, are able to update the information given to you tonight, you know, we certainly want to do that. As I mentioned right at the beginning of this presentation, this stuff is changing dynamically. Some of the stuff that you saw tonight happened within the last 3 to 4 days as far as changes of this and changes of that. So there's been a kind of a lot of volatility going on out there, but from everything that I can see, it still appears pretty much that 1234 will probably roll out and become our next refrigerant. So just have to stay tuned.
Dave, one question just came in that seems interesting here that I didn't see before, but what about the toxicity of the 1234yf or personal exposure to it? Any issues with that?
No, one of the things that came up in the flammability concerns, I think Daimler cited it, is that they were concerned about their service technicians and working on these systems and what were to happen if there were to be some flammability with that then at that point. As far as I know, that's under review. That's all being looked at by this cooperative research program, and DuPont is revisiting it. I think a lot of all the original claims about 1234 are just being revisited all over again. And I know that DuPont has actually made statements to the effect that they're working with Daimler to try to duplicate their testing in terms of what their findings were.
Aside from the flammability side of it, how about inhalation or contact or anything like that?
Haven't read any concerns about that, so that I'm not familiar with.
Okay. Yeah, there were a few questions through here that are really kind of a technical nature that, without being an engineer in this, it's kind of hard to. We certainly don't want to give wrong information or guess.
Exactly, and I can tell, I'm looking at the chat log myself right now, and I can see that there are proponents of kind of both schools of thought to some extent, and I mean, I totally, expected that. Again, I really hate to comment on some of the politics or the manufacturer point of views, because sometimes we think, we get an impression on something, and we really don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Europe has a different view of how this is going on, and the U.S. is kind of doing it with incentives, and Europe is kind of doing this all with a little bit more with a mandate in terms of they're doing with going ahead with their next generation refrigerant. But I mean, really in today's world, we have to look at it like this. I mean, we're becoming less and less of having domestic cars or import cars. I mean, really they're world cars, right? So, regardless of what the ruling might be overseas as opposed to what we're doing here, we kind of end up with a lot of the same things.
Dave, one other question. Are there any MSDS sheets available on the 1234 yet?
Yes, there are. If you go to, and again, we'll send out that listing of the sites, but there's the one website. It is Smart Auto AC, and that really takes you to the DuPont site, and they have MSDS information available there. I came across that. Yeah, it's www.smartautoac.com, smartautoac.com. Any others?
Well, we're getting a lot of feedback. A lot of people want the emails and the information that we have. There were a couple of comments from individuals. I think Don addressed this, that were asking for much more technical information. We certainly, as Don said, don't want to give bad information out. And some of the more technical details on the servicing of this, of course, are still, a work in progress. So we've. Yes. I think we've tried to deliver as much information as we currently have, but to your point, Dave, the webinars, and by the way, thank you all who have commented that you like this webinar format. It's something that we've begun trying here at ASE. So far it's been very popular, and you can count on us to continue these hopefully informative webinar series as we move forward. And certainly as we get more information on the 1234 subject and others, we'll be adding update information as often as we can.
Yeah, here's a question maybe I'd throw out to everybody in the audience that just occurred to me is years past, let me back up just a second. In as many years as I've been with ASE, we've probably been through 6 EPA administrators that have handled Section 609 related issues inside the federal government that we've had a liaison with. And what I'm wondering is, and I just, this is not a formalized type of thing, but I just throw this out to the audience tonight, is would it be of benefit to you if I was able to coordinate with EPA and have them on a webinar as a guest speaker from that governmental point of view? I mean, it might be a co-presentation where, they would come here and we would host it. Would you find that, beneficial? I mean, we've had some really good people from EPA in years past, so, sometimes maybe we might think, geez, that's governmental and it'd be boring and that, but sometimes some of these other issues they can address. Yeah, it looks like we're getting some.
Yeah, some feedback on that. Mm-hmm. I think this obviously is it's a topic that needs a whole lot more investigation. There's obviously a thirst for knowledge on this, and again, I think any light we can shine on it would be greatly appreciated. We'll investigate that, the EPA involvement in our next webinar. Maybe we can get them, Dave, to participate.
Yeah, certainly worth looking into.
Okay, looks like we're just about out of time. Dave, any final words?
The only final words I have, again, is thanks everyone for attending, and continue to monitor this issue. I do apologize to a certain extent that what we're throwing at you is at best trying to make some clarity into all the murkiness. But until things are finalized, we can't make any declarations, so we have to be careful. We'll keep watching this Daimler situation to see what happens with that. That seemed to set off some shock waves. But that's being met now with some additional research on behalf of refrigerant manufacturers, auto manufacturers, SAE themselves. I think it'll probably bring further clarity to 1234. And we'll just continue to monitor it. And if there's anything good that we can bring you, we'll certainly do that.
Okay, let me add my thanks to everybody for attending this evening. Dave, thank you for your informative discussion. And again, we hope you will all join us for the next broadcast. Don, any last words from you?
No, just mirror what you guys said. Thanks, everybody, for your time here tonight. And Dave, thank you for a great job. I know there's a lot of information, and everybody like to have more specific answers, but again, it's an issue in flux yet.
So,
thanks again, everybody, for attending.
We wish you a good night. Have a great day.